There is a certain kind of calm that doesn't announce itself, yet you feel it the moment it enters the room. It is the quiet steadiness of someone who refuses to be pulled into the noise around them. The world may be rushing, unraveling, demanding a reaction, but they don't chase the chaos. They simply breathe, as if they've seen this kind of storm before, and know it cannot touch the ground they stand on. Almost everyone has met a person like that, someone whose presence feels anchored in a way that makes you wonder what shaped them. How do they stay composed while others break? Were they born with this stillness, or did they build it piece by piece through the fractures of their own life? These questions matter because calmness is often misunderstood. It isn't silence for the sake of silence. It's the result of an internal order, a clarity that forms when emotion meets understanding. And the truth is, people like this don't rise above the world. They rise above their reactions to it. The deeper you look, the more you realize that their calm isn't accidental. It's earned, it's learned, and it reveals something powerful about the psychology of those who appear unshaken in a world that never stops moving. Calmness, in its truest form, is never something a person is born with. It is shaped, refined, and carved out through the slow abrasion of life. When you look closely at people who seem unshaken, you often find a history that tells a very different story. Many of them were once overwhelmed by their own thoughts, pulled in every direction by emotion, trying desperately to control outcomes that refused to obey. They overanalyzed every word, carried the weight of every misunderstanding, and exhausted themselves trying to keep their world from falling apart. What you see now is the result of everything they once were, not what they started as. Human psychology gives this a clearer frame. The mind learns from discomfort. When someone repeatedly experiences chaos, disappointment, or emotional overload, the brain begins to adapt. It stops relying on panic because it has learned, often the hard way, that panic accomplishes nothing. It stops believing that control is always available because it has seen that life will break expectations no matter how tightly they're held. Through enough repetitions of emotional struggle, the brain starts to search for another strategy. That strategy is calmness, not as a personality trait, but as an evolved response. You can imagine someone who used to argue to feel heard, only to realize later that raising their voice never changed a single outcome. Or someone who spent years trying to fix everything for everyone until the exhaustion became unbearable. At some point, they reached a moment of clarity, the kind that arrives only after years of internal friction. They understood that life doesn't bend simply because we insist, and it's in that realization that their stillness began to form. There is a profound truth here. People don't become calm because they avoid life's storms. They become calm because they have walked through enough of them to understand which ones matter and which ones don't. Experience didn't harden them, it refined them. It taught them that survival doesn't depend on constantly pushing back, but on learning when to release the fight. That is why their presence feels grounded. Their calmness is not an accident, it's the wisdom that rises when struggle has finally taught the mind to breathe. What's important to understand is that calmness is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of emotional intelligence. Many people mistake stillness for suppression, assuming that calm individuals simply push their feelings down or disconnect from what they're experiencing. But suppression is a form of tension, a tightening of the mind that eventually erupts. True calmness is the opposite. It is a loosening, a widening of awareness that allows emotion to exist without taking control. Psychology draws a clear line between these two states. Suppression is the attempt to silence emotion. Regulation is the ability to guide it. People who carry genuine calm have learned the language of their emotions. They can feel anger without being consumed by it, sadness without drowning, fear without collapsing under its weight. They have developed something known as distress tolerance, the capacity to remain present even when the internal world is uncomfortable. This is what gives their calm its depth. It isn't shallow peace created by avoiding life, but a steady presence created by understanding it. Consider a moment of conflict. Most people react before thinking, driven by the immediacy of emotional discomfort. The calm person responds differently because they've trained themselves to create space between the feeling and the reaction. That space is where clarity lives. Instead of rushing to defend themselves, they observe the emotion rising in their body. Instead of impulsively speaking, they allow the feeling to settle long enough for their reasoning to surface. This doesn't make them cold, it makes them precise. They respond from understanding, not instinct. This emotional fluency often develops over years of inner work, even if the person never consciously called it that. Every time they chose reflection over reactivity, every time they paused before responding, every time they faced a difficult emotion without letting it define their behavior, they were building a different kind of strength. Over time, the mind learns that emotion is not the enemy. Misinterpretation is. When emotion meets understanding, reaction loses its power. That is why calm people stand out. They are not disconnected from feeling. They are deeply connected to it, but in a way that grants them agency rather than surrender. They move through the world with a sense of grounded awareness because they have learned to navigate their own inner landscape. And in a culture that mistakes loudness for strength, their quiet mastery becomes unmistakably powerful. Underneath this emotional mastery lies a deeper neurological shift. Calmness is not just a mindset, it is a pattern the brain learns over time. At the center of emotional reactivity sits the amygdala, the structure responsible for detecting threat and generating rapid emotional responses. When the amygdala fires without restraint, it creates what psychologists call an amygdala hijack, a moment when emotion overrides logic and the body reacts before the mind can think. Most people live in that loop, pulled into immediate reactions because the brain hasn't learned another path. For calm individuals, that path looks different. Through repeated experiences of emotional intensity, their prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for reasoning, evaluation, and decision-making, begins to activate more efficiently. It steps in sooner, interrupting the emotional surge before it becomes action. What appears as composure on the outside is often the result of this internal coordination, a dialogue between emotion and cognition that has become more balanced. Their brain has practiced pausing long enough for thought to catch up to feeling. That pause is small, but psychologically powerful. It creates a moment of choice. Instead of reacting to the first impulse the amygdala sends, they allow the prefrontal cortex to reinterpret the situation. What once felt like danger now registers as discomfort. What once demanded an immediate reaction now invites reflection. This neurological shift is what gives their calm its consistency. It is not willpower, it is rewiring. You can see it in the way they handle confrontation, uncertainty, or stress. Their body doesn't rush into fight or flight as quickly. Their breath remains steady. Their mind stays open. They have built a home in the space between stimulus and response, and that home becomes the ground they stand on when the world grows loud. What makes this even more compelling is that calmness often begins as a form of protection rather than wisdom. Many people who appear grounded today learned early on that reacting loudly did not make them safer. In environments filled with tension, conflict, or unpredictability, silence became a shield. Staying composed was a way to avoid escalation, to stay unnoticed, to maintain a sense of control when everything around them felt unstable. Their calm was not a choice at first. It was survival. Over time, that survival strategy evolved. What once was emotional distance slowly became emotional clarity. The habit of observing before reacting, originally developed to avoid harm, transformed into a deeper understanding of their own internal patterns. They became familiar with the triggers that once controlled them. They learned to recognize the first signs of emotional overwhelm and to steady themselves before the feeling could take over. The restraint that began as caution gradually turned into self-awareness. You can see this transformation in someone who grew up around constant arguments, who learned to read the emotional climate of a room before anyone spoke. As an adult, that same sensitivity becomes insight. Their ability to stay calm is not detachment but discernment. They know which situations deserve their energy and which ones quietly drain it. They no longer react to everything because they understand the cost of doing so. This evolution reveals a profound truth in psychology. Defense mechanisms do not always remain defenses. When a person grows, what once protected them can become what empowers them. Calmness becomes less about avoiding chaos and more about choosing peace. It stops being armor and becomes awareness, the kind that allows someone to move through life with intention rather than instinct. As this inner awareness deepens, it begins to shape how calm individuals move through the social world. Their presence carries a kind of stability that others instinctively respond to. In conversations, conflicts, or group dynamics, they become the quiet center that steadies the environment. People feel safer around them not because they say the right things, but because their energy doesn't add to the chaos. This alone is a form of influence, one rooted in composure rather than dominance. Psychologically, calmness becomes a shield against manipulation. When someone does not react immediately, they become harder to provoke, harder to guilt, harder to control. Emotional turbulence relies on reciprocity. Drama needs fuel. When faced with a person who doesn't take the bait, the pattern breaks. You can see it clearly when someone tries to escalate a situation, but the calm person responds with clarity instead of emotion. The tension dissolves because there is nothing for it to hold on to. This ability to stay grounded also sharpens perception. In stillness, motives become clearer. The calm mind picks up on subtleties that others overlook. The hesitation in someone's tone, the insecurity behind an argument, the fear hidden beneath anger. What looks like intuition is often the product of a nervous system that is not overwhelmed. They can observe without being pulled in, and because of that, they see truth sooner. In relationships, this shows up as patience, empathy, and an ability to act rather than react. In professional settings, it appears as level-headed decision-making and emotional consistency. Calm people do not rush to conclusions because they understand that clarity unfolds over time. They recognize patterns before they become problems, and their restraint becomes a quiet form of authority. There is a reason this kind of presence feels magnetic. In a world conditioned to respond immediately, someone who chooses reflection stands out. Their calm disrupts the cycle of reactivity. Their steadiness becomes a counterweight to noise. And perhaps most importantly, their refusal to join chaos exposes just how unnecessary most chaos truly is. As their perception sharpens, calm people begin to see the world through a wider lens. They no longer interpret every difficulty as a personal attack or every setback as a catastrophe. Instead, they recognize patterns, cycles, and causes that extend beyond the moment. Where most people see problems, they see invitations to understand something deeper. This shift in perspective is one of the most defining features of genuine calmness. It changes not only how they react, but how they interpret reality itself. Psychology often refers to this as cognitive reframing, the ability to reinterpret events in a way that reduces emotional intensity. Calm individuals practice this naturally. When something goes wrong, they don't ask why me, but why not me, not out of resignation but out of awareness that life distributes challenge without preference. This acceptance softens the emotional blow. It removes the added suffering that comes from resisting what already is. This mindset aligns closely with the principle of radical acceptance, the idea that acknowledging reality does not mean approving of it, but refusing to waste energy fighting the unchangeable. Calm people understand that pain, by itself, is a sensation. It's the mental struggle against that pain that transforms it into suffering. Instead of bracing against every change, they lean into the truth of it. They let discomfort move through them instead of building walls around it. Because of this, they navigate transitions differently. They can see endings as transformations, closed doors as redirections, and loss as part of the human experience rather than an exception to it. Their calmness is not detachment from life, but a deeper connection to its rhythms. When you zoom out far enough, chaos becomes pattern, and uncertainty becomes movement. Calm people live with that awareness, and it allows them to stay steady even when the shape of their life is shifting. As this perspective becomes a natural part of how they move through life, calm people begin to rely on habits that reinforce their internal steadiness. Their calm is not accidental. It is supported by simple, consistent routines that anchor the mind. These habits often look ordinary from the outside, yet psychologically, they play a powerful role in stabilizing the nervous system. A quiet morning ritual, a slow cup of tea, a short walk without technology, a few minutes of stillness before sleep. These moments create pockets of predictability that help the mind reset. Psychology shows that repetition gives the brain a sense of safety. When the external world feels uncertain, small rituals act as grounding points. Calm people protect these patterns because they know how easily the mind can drift into agitation when life becomes too chaotic. Their routines are not about control, they are about clarity. They provide enough structure to keep the mind from spiraling into unnecessary narratives. What makes these habits meaningful is the intention behind them. Calm individuals don't seek silence to escape life, they seek it to understand life. In those quiet moments, emotions settle, thoughts unclench, and the mind returns to a state where perspective is possible. Stillness becomes a form of maintenance, not withdrawal. It is how they make space for reflection, for emotional processing, and for the kind of presence that cannot be created in a rushed or reactive state. This is why their calm feels so genuine. It is built not in dramatic transformations, but in small choices repeated with intention. Through these routines, they cultivate a life where clarity has room to breathe. If there is a defining thread running through the lives of calm people, it is intentional practice. Their steadiness is not a gift but a skill, one that anyone can cultivate with the right tools. The path toward calmness does not require grand changes. It begins with small acts of awareness that gradually reshape the mind. One of the most effective techniques is the 5-second pause. When emotion rises, the instinct is to react, but deliberately slowing the moment interrupts the automatic loop between feeling and action. In those 5 seconds, the prefrontal cortex regains its footing, allowing thought to catch up to instinct. Over time, this pause becomes a natural part of emotional processing. Another practice is naming the emotion rather than the story around it. Instead of saying everything is falling apart, you say, I am feeling anxious. Instead of they disrespected me, you say, I feel hurt. This simple shift engages a different part of the brain, creating distance between you and the narrative your mind wants to build. The emotion becomes something you're experiencing, not something that is consuming you. A third technique involves writing down triggers. When the same situations keep provoking you, the pattern is trying to teach you something. By journaling these moments, you begin to see the architecture of your emotional responses. Awareness turns into choice, and choice turns into calm. Finally, a 1-minute breathing reset can change the entire tone of a moment. Slow breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, signaling to the body that it is safe. Even in the middle of conflict or stress, this brief physiological shift can create clarity where there was once overwhelm. Calmness grows through these small practices. They train the mind to return to steadiness, to build resilience from the inside out. With repetition, these techniques become the foundation of a quieter, stronger inner world. When you step back and look at the full picture, calmness becomes something far greater than a trait. It is a way of moving through the world with intention. Think again of that person whose presence steadies a room, the one who seems untouched by the noise that pulls everyone else off balance. Their calm is not the result of an easy life. It is the result of choosing, again and again, not to be carried away by every emotional current. They learned that strength is not found in resistance but in understanding, not in controlling every outcome but in controlling their response to it. What makes their calm so powerful is that it reflects a deep internal alignment. They are no longer fighting every thought or chasing every fear. They have stopped expecting life to bend and started trusting their ability to navigate whatever comes. This trust creates a quiet confidence, the kind that does not need to be displayed or defended. It is felt rather than spoken. In a world that moves quickly and reacts instantly, choosing calm becomes an act of clarity. It is a declaration that your inner world will not be dictated by external pressures. Calmness becomes a form of strength that does not shout, it simply stands. And so the question turns back to you. What part of your life is asking for stillness? Where can you pause long enough for understanding to replace instinct? Perhaps the real journey begins when you stop trying to outrun the storm and learn instead to become the stillness within it.